A doctor earns $400,000 a year and has almost nothing saved. An engineer with 2 degrees just panic sold an entire portfolio at the worst possible moment. A lawyer, someone trained to weigh evidence for a living, just sank $80,000 into an investment they didn't even understand. These aren't careless people. These are some of the sharpest, most educated people in the room. And yet, when it comes to money, they keep tripping over the same invisible wires. So, what's going on here? Why do people who are clearly intelligent keep making financial decisions that work against them? Here's the uncomfortable truth: being smart and being good with money are two completely different skills. And in a lot of cases, being smart can actually make things worse. Let's talk about why. The first thing to understand is that money is never just money. On paper, finance looks clean: numbers, interest rates, percentages. But the second, real dollars are involved. Dollars tied to rent, to retirement, to the life someone is trying to build. Everything changes. Money becomes emotional. It gets tangled up with fear, identity, pride, childhood memories, and the pressure to keep up with everyone else. And this is where the brain starts playing tricks. There's a concept in behavioral finance called loss aversion. Researchers have found that losing $100 feels about 2 to 2.5 times more painful than gaining $100 feels good. And because of that imbalance, people start making strange choices. They hold on to bad investments way too long, hoping things will bounce back, just so they don't have to face the loss. Or they sell winning investments too early, locking in small gains because they're afraid those gains might disappear. The data backs this up. According to research cited by NetWealth, the average equity investor earns around 4% per year, while the broader market returns closer to 10%. That gap, 6 full percentage points, isn't explained by bad luck. It's explained by bad timing, and bad timing is almost always driven by emotion. Now, here's where intelligence becomes a problem. Smart people are very good at one particular thing that can be financially dangerous, and that's rationalizing. When someone with a sharp mind wants to do something, they can build an incredibly convincing argument for why it's the right move. They can talk themselves into risky bets. They can explain away red flags. They can justify emotional decisions with logic that sounds airtight, even when the real driver underneath is fear or greed or ego. A less analytical person might just say, "This doesn't feel right," and walk away. But a smart person will construct a whole thesis for why this time is different, and then they'll act on it. This is overconfidence bias, and it's more common than most people realize. A FINRA study found that 64% of investors rate their own investment knowledge as high, but the actual returns tell a very different story. Overconfident investors trade more often, which racks up fees and taxes, and their results are consistently worse than people who just left things alone. There's also a related problem that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's the way smart people compare themselves to other smart people. When someone is surrounded by high earners, the definition of normal shifts upward. A $500,000 house feels modest. A $70,000 car feels practical. And suddenly, financial pressure isn't coming from a lack of income. It's coming from the social environment. Behavioral economists call this reference group influence. The people around you shape what feels acceptable to spend. And for high achievers, those reference groups tend to be expensive. Then there's analysis paralysis, another trap that hits intelligent people especially hard. Someone who is analytical by nature wants to understand every angle before making a move. They want perfect information. They want certainty. So they research for months. They read every article. They build spreadsheets and run scenarios. And by the time they finally feel ready, the opportunity has moved on. Meanwhile, someone with a much simpler approach, someone who understood one basic principle like buy assets that produce income, already made the investment and started earning returns months ago. And there's something interesting about that delay. It's not that the analytical person made a bad call. They just never made a call at all. The cost of waiting for perfect information is often greater than the cost of getting started with good enough information. That distinction matters a lot, especially when time in the market is one of the most powerful advantages any investor can have. There's also something called lifestyle creep, and it's devastating to high earners in particular. Recent surveys show that nearly 50% of Americans earning $100,000 or more per year are living paycheck to paycheck. Among those earning between $300,000 and $500,000, That number is 41%. These aren't people who don't make enough money. These are people whose spending expands to match every raise, every bonus, every new level of income. And because they're smart, they have perfectly reasonable explanations for all of it. Better schools for the kids, a nicer neighborhood, a car that reflects their professional status. Each expense makes sense on its own, but stacked together, they form a pattern that drains wealth instead of building it. Here's another one: the complexity trap. Smart people tend to believe that effective strategies should be sophisticated. They're drawn to complicated investment vehicles, layered financial products, exotic asset classes. There's almost an assumption that if something is simple, it can't be powerful. But the evidence tells the opposite story. The people who build lasting wealth tend to follow surprisingly straightforward principles. They spend less than they earn. They invest consistently. They buy assets they actually understand. They stay patient during downturns. None of this requires advanced intelligence. What it requires is emotional regulation, the ability to feel fear or excitement and still make the right call. And that brings up the real issue underneath all of this. The education system, the same system that produced all of these sharp, capable people, never taught them how money actually works. It taught them to follow instructions, avoid mistakes, and find the right answer. Building wealth is messy. There often isn't one right answer. There's risk, there's uncertainty, and there's a lot of learning through failure. So people come out of school with the impression that financial success is something that happens automatically when you earn a high income. And then they spend decades wondering why the maths isn't working out. What makes this even more frustrating is that the information is available. There are books, podcasts, channels like this one, all breaking down how money really works. But knowing something and doing something about it are still very far apart. That gap between knowledge and action is where most financial damage happens. And part of the reason for that gap is that changing financial behavior means confronting some uncomfortable things. It means admitting that a certain purchase was about status and not necessity. It means looking at a bank statement and recognizing patterns that don't match the goals. It means accepting that being smart in one area of life doesn't automatically carry over to every other area. That kind of honesty is hard, but it's also the turning point. So what actually helps? First, automation. Take the emotional decision-making out of the equation entirely. Set up automatic contributions to investment accounts, automatic bill payments, automatic savings transfers. When the system runs without needing a decision each time, there's no moment for fear or impulse to step in and cause damage. Second, reduce how often you're checking in. Watching a portfolio every day increases anxiety and emotional trading without improving results. People who check less frequently and ignore the daily noise consistently do better over time. Third, set rules in advance. Decide what to do during a downturn before the downturn hits. Write it down. When emotions are running high, follow the plan, not the feeling. And fourth, get an outside perspective. One of the biggest traps smart people fall into is believing they can handle everything on their own. But when it comes to money, a second set of eyes, someone who isn't emotionally attached to the outcome, can catch blind spots that are impossible to see from the inside. The bottom line is this: financial success isn't an intelligence test, it's a behavior test. And the sooner that distinction becomes clear, the sooner smart people can stop working against themselves and start building the wealth they're more than capable of creating. If you got value from this, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.